Hello there, and welcome to this video about The Legend of Zelda. I'm currently doing a project where I go over the lore of the classic 3D Zelda games, from Ocarina of Time to Skyward Sword in chronological order. This will not follow the official timeline as detailed in the Zelda Encyclopedia and the official Zelda website, but this timeline instead, the extended child timeline. If you want to know more about why I do this, I made a video on this and the wider history of the Zelda timeline that I will link in the description. In this second video, I will go over the earliest era of the Kingdom of Hyrule. It starts directly after the events of Skyward Sword, then goes through Hyrule's founding and all the way up until Link pulls the Master Sword from its pedestal in Ocarina of Time. I will be helped in this by my friend Somasoa, who will narrate the second part of this video.
Hi, I'm Somasoa, a Nintendo enthusiast with a particular emphasis on Zelda. I'm thankful for the opportunity to speak with you all today.
It's also recommended to watch my previous video in this series before going to this one, covering the events of creation and Skyward Sword. As for this era, it's probably one of the ones where the extended child timeline differs most from the timeline seen in books and official websites. Those place the Minish Cap and 4 swords in this era, but this will not be done here. Partially because Skyward Sword was more to connect directly with Ocarina of Time in various ways continuity wise, but also because I feel those games fit better elsewhere when the general flow of the timeline is concerned. The era covered in this video is mostly marked by internal strife within the Kingdom of Hyrule, where the politics between the various species drive the story instead of the influence of demons or the Demon King. And, as with the last video, parts of this video will also require some inference and interpretation on certain lore details, which will be clearer when certain language is used to describe its possibilities instead of downright fact. This video will also contain spoilers for the following Zelda games. At the end of Skyward Sword, Link and Zelda decided to live on the surface, watch over the Triforce. It seems that they were eventually joined by other people from Skyloft, as humans eventually began to live on the surface again. They would also go on to develop technologically, as the people of this era are described in Twilight Princess as a sophisticated civilization. This may have been spurred by salvaging technology from the industrial district of the Lanayru province, given the region is entirely bereft of such technology in later eras. One of the most notable creations of the people of this time was the spinner, which allowed people to ride along railings built into walls. Many of the buildings contained such railings and targets meant to be used for claw shots, tying back to the Lanayru province. In general, the humans were considered very close to the gods and known as the Sky Folk, likely due to their origins in Skyloft. They may have also assisted other peoples of the region by sharing their technology. With their advanced technology, they likely converted the Sealed Temple, which was located in the slight southwestern forests of the land, into a new Temple of Time, given the similar layout of the two temples and the presence of similar mushrooms near both of them. The Temple of Light, at the center of the Sacred Realm, was likely also connected to the Temple of Time, forming its back portion, accessible only by putting the Master Sword inside its pedestal. The temple was filled with all kinds of advanced automatons, some sharing names with those found in Lanayru province. The Skyfolk also created the Dominion Rod, which allowed one to make statues copy their movements by the use of magic. It came to be stored in the Temple of Time as well, and was likely given to this era's incarnation of the Seven Sages, given depictions of 7 figures in the Temple of Time, one holding the rod. Roru, the earliest named Sage of Light, was one of their members. The sages also had connections with the temple built in the western deserts, called the Arbiter's Grounds, with their symbols being found all over it. The temple was likely constructed by the Skyfolk and the Gerudo together, given the presence of architectural elements relevant to both. It contained spinner railings and a spinner, with also depictions of the Gerudo symbol, Gerudo language, and statue of their goddess, the Desert Colossus. The purpose of the temple may have been to serve as a sort of symbol for friendship between both peoples, being a site of worship for elements of both their religions. However, it also served as an execution prison where the worst criminals of the land were kept and likely executed at the hands of a giant beast known as the Hara Giant in Japanese and Stalord in English. The skull of the beast likely served as the symbol of the prison, and likely due to the lingering resentment of the people executed there, it became a breeding ground for malice and the undead. Notably, Staltroop dressed in what seems to be gladiator gear lined the room of the giant beast. Gerudo may also have supplied the older people of the region with blocks, switches and crystals bearing their symbol, which were found all over. At some point after the construction of those temples and assisting the peoples of the region, the humans founded the Kingdom of Hyrule and built Hyrule Castle with their advanced technology. The root of that name was Hylia, deriving from the goddess, and its people began to call themselves Hylians. The people from prior eras became known as the ancestors of the Hylians. The Hylians considered themselves close to the gods, but not as close as their ancestors. Due to this, it was said that their tall ears allowed them to hear the voices of the gods and that they excelled in magic. The royal family of Hyrule were the descendants of Zelda and thus bore the blood of the goddess, giving them magical powers such as prophetic dreams and the ability to seal beings of great darkness. At the same time as Hyrule's founding, some humans returned to the sky by building a new capital with their advanced technology, the City in the Sky, and continued to be called Skyfolk. The royal family, meanwhile, was protected by two clans, one of whom were the Knights of Hyrule or Hylian Knights, a family that was said to give rise to the hero whenever the royal family was in danger. They were likely descended from Hylia's chosen hero, one of the progenitors of the royal family, and wielded replicas of his Hylian shield. They were like the elites who stood above the regular soldiers who served the royal family as the kingdom's standing army. They also passed down various hidden skills that did not leave their bloodline: the mortal draw, the jump strike, and the great spin. The great spin specifically could only be performed by those of the knight's bloodline who were destined to become the hero. They also used techniques like the ending blow and the shield attack, which at one point were taught at the Knight Academy on Skyloft, as well as the backslice and the helm splitter. The Sheikah also swore fealty to the royal family, continuing their duty as Hylia's chosen protectors and served it from the darkness as the shadows of the Hylians. They lived in a hidden village called Old Kakariko that lay in a secluded gorge near the mountains and which may have been founded by Impa in previous eras. Eventually, some of them would move to a new Kakariko village that was located more to the east of the kingdom at the foot of Death Mountain. Beyond this new village was a graveyard where the Sheikah, Hylian knights, and members of the royal family were laid to rest. Some of the Sheikah also had the ability to see the truth, likely tying back to Hylia's divine sight. In tandem with this, the Sheikah also developed several objects that allowed them to see the truth in several ways. The Lens of Truth allowed those who used magic to see through illusions and see invisible things. The Mask of Truth allowed one to speak with the gossip stones that the Sheikah had built all over the kingdom, with some likely being remnants of earlier eras. And the Shard of Agony would play a chiming sound if secrets were nearby. It also seems that around this time the name of the provinces from earlier eras fell into disuse, as the elemental dragons they were likely named for also faded from the relevancy of history. For example, it is likely that Elden Volcano was renamed to Death Mountain in this time period, and that Leneru Desert became known as just the Western Desert. Rabbits also inhabited the general region, but were hunted to extinction by the people of the kingdom. Hyrule also found itself amidst other peoples that also called the surface home. To the east of the kingdom were woods under the protection of the Great Deku Tree, with the Kokiri living in Kokiri Forest near him. They were the same as the Koroks, just having taken on humanoid shape, lived in a hollowed out tree stumps, and each had a fairy companion. They also played around their forest and sometimes ventured out into the maze-like lost woods. Those woods were home to Deku Scripts, wooden beings that would shoot Deku nuts at others, certain demons. Aliens who got lost in the woods would die and come back as demons. Children wound up becoming music-loving, adult-hating skull kids, while adults became stall foes. Deep in the woods was located a large temple known as the Forest Temple, which was tied to the sages of forest. As such, symbols of forest and of the Triforce were present inside. 4 sisters also served as priestesses in the temple, but at some point they died and the temple was consumed by the woods. Undead creatures, including the Hylians turned into Stalfos, went on to live there. Gorons meanwhile came to call Death Mountain home, living in a large cave system known as Goron City halfway up the mountain. They also established Dodongo's cavern to mine the gourmet rocks they ate, and it was built around the skeleton of a giant Dodongo, demonic dinosaurs that likely used to inhabit the region. Inside were also Armos, robots built by the Gorons that they also traded with other regions. On the volcano summit meanwhile, a fire temple connected to the sages of fire was built. The temple extended up into 2 towers, likely being the 2 large rocks inside the crater of the volcano summit. At some point, the Gorons would also come into conflict with Volvagia, who was likely the guardian spirit of Death Mountain. The dragon ate some of the Gorons, but was killed by a Goron hero who wielded a Megalton hammer. Afterwards, the hammer was placed in the fire temple and the hero's bloodline provided the leader of the Gorons. The Zoras, fish-like humanoids with long lifespans, also emerged as they evolved from fish, likely the Parella, had to stay in or near water to survive. It is unclear what happened to the Mokmas and the Kikwis, but they vanished from the region as time went on. The symbol of the Zoras was based on Nehru's symbol, and they came to live at the source of the region's waters. This was called Zora's Fountain and was the home of their patron deity, Lord Jabu Jabu. The Zoras themselves lived in a cave called Zora's Domain that lay under the fountain and were led by a royal family. The entrance to the cave lay behind the sleepless waterfall, which fed into Zora's river that stretched across the entire region, ended in Lake Hylia, which also had a tunnel connecting back to Zora's Domain. The Zoras also built some structures in the lake and the water temple, which was used for the worship of water spirits and connected to the sages of water, hence the presence of the water symbol inside. Gerudo meanwhile lived in the western deserts and as mentioned before likely had a hand in the building of the Arbiter's grounds. If that side indeed indicate that the Gerudo were friendly with the ancestors of the Hylians at some point, it should be noted that their relation turned sour. The Gerudo lived in Gerudo's fortress, which lay in the canyon separating the green fields of Hyrule from the desert to the west. They were thieves who guarded their border with the kingdom closely and would seek out Hylian men to have children with. As such children would biologically always be Gerudo, and because only a single man was born to the Gerudo every 100 years, that man was always destined to become king of the Gerudo. Some of the Gerudo were also practitioners of magic, like the witches Kum and Kotake, who wielded fire and ice magic and were long-lived. In the fortress, the Gerudo would also train their horseback archery skills and had a dungeon that acted as a training ground for them. On the far side of the desert was located the Spirit Temple, which was connected to the Sages of Spirit. It was also dedicated to and contained statues of the Desert Colossus, which was also the name of the region of the desert is set in. Between the Desert Colossus and Gerudo's fortress was the Haunted Wasteland, where sandstorms reigned and people could easily get lost if they did not know the correct path through. The Sky Folk would maintain a cultural exchange with the Kingdom of Hyrule, which still used advanced technology at this time as Hyrule Castle incorporated spinner railings. This was facilitated by the Messenger of the Heavens, who wielded the Dominion Rod at the behest of the royal family to send their messages. The messenger likely traveled to the sky via one of the many cannons of the Sky Folk, which could shoot people into the sky. However, as time went by, the paths of the two peoples diverged. Hyrule became less technologically advanced and its writing system gradually changed, with multiple systems being adopted. The Skyfolk meanwhile changed into the bird-like people called the Oka, while also developing their own writing system. Some characters of this system can still be found at Hyrule Castle, indicating that this change may have occurred while the two peoples still had contact. The Dominion Rod also lost its power over the long years, contact between the two thus ceased. The Skyfolk also left behind clues as to how to re-establish that contact. They left behind one of their many cannons on the surface, which was likely sealed by the messenger under Kakariko village, and sealed behind a statue that could be moved with the Dominion Rod. The Skyfolk also left a skybook with the Sheikah of the hidden village, which contained a spell to restore power to the rod. The rod could then be used to move several owl statues the Skyfolk had left behind on the surface to reveal characters of their language, which were part of a spell that was left out of the book, used to undo a seal on the room where the cannon was stored. One Sheikah line stayed behind in the hidden village to guard the book until a new messenger to the heavens would appear.
During all this time, the Triforce was kept within the Kingdom of Hyrule. At some point, word of its wish-granting powers spread throughout the land, the words of Hylia not having been heeded. People thus started warring over it and also over the kingdom itself, having abandoned their earlier faithful ways. It was in this time the Sheikah may have established several dungeons under Kakariko village. One connected to a well, which was built where the house of the creator of the Lens of Truth had once stood. Another connected to a grave in the graveyard and the village's windmill. A third was the Shadow Temple, tied to the Sage of Shadow, the element known as darkness in Japanese. These may have been established as places where the Sheikah would deal with enemies of the royal family, as they contained many torture and execution devices. Corpses piled up in these locations, and so they gave rise to the undead, likely due to the lingering resentment of those killed there, becoming a resting ground for malice, tying it to darkness. As such, it was said that in the Shadow Temple rested Hyrule's bloody history of greed and hatred. Among the warring people, powerful sorcerers appeared, who wielded shadow magic in the form of the fused shadow. This was a mask that allowed its wielder to transform into a mighty, trident-wielding beast. However, it was also dangerous, because such shadow magic would turn into darkness, likely a shadowy form of malice when combined with the light of force. People who touched it would turn into demons. It is possible that these sorcerers were made up of Gerudo and Sheikah, given both tribes were known for wielding magic and the descendants of the sorcerers possessed red hair and a symbol similar to that of the Gerudo. The shadow magic is separate from the sagely element of shadow, which as mentioned is known as darkness in Japanese. Eventually, the goddesses sent the three light spirits who maintained the light of Hyrule, Farron, Eldin, and Lanayru, to intervene. They sealed the fused shadow and split it into four. 3 parts were given to the peoples of Hyrule, one to the Kokiri, who sealed it in a temple built in several large trees, one to the Gorons, who sealed it inside the mines they had built low in Death Mountain, and one to the Zoras, who sealed it in the Zora Temple at the bottom of a large lake north of the Temple of Time. The sorcerers themselves were chased by the spirits across Hyrule and banished into the Twilight Realm via the Mirror of Twilight, another object made of shadow magic that they may have made themselves. The final piece of the fused shadow was thrown into the Twilight Realm with them. That realm was one of shadow that had its own shadowy versions of force and malice and consisted of floating islands perpetually floating in a twilight sky. The sorcerers would eventually acclimate to the shadow and become the Twilight, building an advanced palace based on souls, which were the equivalent to the sun of the light world. The Mirror of Twilight would be placed in the care of the 7 sages, who watched over it at the Arbiter's grounds. The strife over the Triforce in Hyrule did not end, however, so the royal family summoned the 7 sages to seal the Triforce in the Sacred Realm. It is possible that the Silent Realm became the Sacred Realm, as the former turned a bright gold after the Triforce was claimed by Hylia's chosen hero, reflecting what was in his heart. At this time, the Sacred Realm was also known to possess golden twilight skies. Nonetheless, the sages built a new Temple of Time, likely separate from the previous 2, near Hyrule Castle in the north of Hyrule. This was to protect the Triforce from evil ones. Rauru connected the back of the temple to the path of the Sacred Realm, and the Triforce was laid to rest inside. The Master Sword was also moved to this new temple and acted as a lock on the Sacred Realm, as the path to it would only open if it was pulled from the pedestal of time. In this era, 2 additional sages, those of Earth and Wind with bloodlines among the Zoras and Kokiri respectively, maintained the power to repel evil on the Master Sword. They did this by playing their instruments praying to gods of Earth and Wind, likely Hylia, whose power is also derived from springs of earth and sky. Without the prayers, the Master Sword would revert to a form similar to the one it had prior to being blessed by Hylia. Members of the royal family would use the Wind Waker, a magical conductor's baton, to conduct the sages. The Pedestal of Time, meanwhile, was sealed behind the Door of Time, for which 5 keys were made. The first 2 were the Ocarina of Time and the Song of Time, which were given to the royal family. The other 3 were spiritual stones, fashioned after the symbols of the tribes living around Hyrule: an emerald for the Kokiri, a ruby for the Gorons, and a sapphire for the Zoras. This was likely to ensure no one tribe held all access to the Sacred Realm. The sages, meanwhile, seem to have stayed in the Chamber of Sages in the Temple of Light afterwards, perhaps to protect the Triforce. A prophecy about a new hero, the Hero of Time, also came into being around this time. It was said he would awaken 7 sages and descend once the Door of Time would be opened. Parts of this new legend were incorporated in a plaque in the Temple of Time. Lastly, to further protect the Triforce, it was kept a secret that it was held in the Sacred Realm. However, people came to know that the entrance to the Sacred Realm was located in the Temple of Time. That temple and the other sage temples were given Triforce pedestals mirroring the Pedestal of Time, and each had a special song associated with it that allowed one to warp to those pedestals. The Temple of Time was given a pedestal associated with the elements of light, likely because it became connected to the Temple of Light in the Sacred Realm. It seemed that all of this ended the wars over the Triforce and Hyrule, which became known as the land where the power of the gods rested. Yet, peace would not find this kingdom. At the time, the Hylians lived in the castle town south of Hyrule Castle, where the newest Temple of Time also stood. The town had a bustling marketplace where many shops could be found, and a more quiet residential district. At night, many dogs would roam there. The Hylians also had Lon Lon Ranch on Hyrule Field in the center of the kingdom, where cattle was held for milk, and horses, a prized mode of transportation, were bred as well. A lone researcher, meanwhile, lived on the shores of Lake Hylia, researching its mysteries and water contents. He was also the teacher of a potion maker, who was part of a carpenter family. A merchant sold beans on the banks of Zora's River, and another sold bomb shoes, a type of bomb that could walk a bit before exploding, in the middle of the desert. A third man opened a fishing hole in a pond near Lake Hylia. War would once again break out, engulfing Hyrule and the tribes surrounding it. It is unclear what this war was about, but it seems unrelated to the wars fought over the Triforce, as by the time of Ocarina of Time, those events had faded into legend. This war, meanwhile, occurred merely a decade before Ocarina of Time. It is still possible to make a rough outline of which factions were aligned with which, however. At the time, the Zoras were led by King Zora Daban XVI, who was childhood friends with Big Goron, a particularly large Goron. The Gorons and Zoras were thus likely friendly with each other in this war. Meanwhile, Hylians were generally fearful of the Gerudo, and the incumbent boss of the Gorons, Darunia, outright states that he hates them. This may indicate that the war was once being fought against the Gerudo. Perhaps the Kingdom of Hyrule and the clans that served it formed a third faction in this conflict. It is known that on their side, a greatly injured Hylian mother fled the flames of war to Kokiri Forest, indicating that it was a neutral faction. She left her son in the care of the Great Deku Tree, and he would be raised as a Kokiri, unaware that he was a Hylian, but never received a fairy like his peers. The war ended with the unification of the local powers under the banner of Hyrule's royal family, though they kept a level of independence. The King of Hyrule and Darunia became sworn brothers, but a border guard was placed at the entrance to Death Mountain. The entrance to Zora's domain could only be opened by messengers of the royal family who knew Zelda's Lullaby, a song passed down by the royal family based on the Ballad of the Goddess. The Zoras still retained their own monarchy, however. The war also left its scars on the land. The Gerudo continued to have a sour relationship with Hyrule, and the Sheikah's numbers had dwindled due to the prolonged wars, the sight of one being considered a rarity in peace times. Among the likely victims were the Composer brothers, who had been tasked by the royal family to research their hereditary powers as well as those of the Triforce. They had also created the Sun Song, which allowed one control over the passage of time and inscribed it in the tomb of the royal family. They died at the hands of the Gerudo king Ganondorf to protect that research and were laid to rest in the graveyard. Due to the dwindling of her people, Impa, the nanny of Princess Zelda and the leader of Kakariko Village, opened it up to the Hylians. She lived in a house where she kept many notes on phenomena around Hyrule, while carpenters and their families moved in to start reconstruction efforts in the village. The graveyard came to be tended by Dompe, who lived in a shack near it. The village was also home to a rich family consisting of a father and 5 sons, who were known as far as Zora's domain and likely used the Shard of Agony to gather their fortune. However, due to their greed, they were cursed and turned into Skulltulas by 100 gold Skulltulas, who hid all over Hyrule and the regions beyond. Lastly, at night, stall children would also rise on Hyrule Field, likely the corpses of those who had perished in the wars.
Some years after the end of the last war and the unification of the region, Ganondorf started plotting to take the Triforce for his own. He had been raised by Kum and Kotake, and it is possible they told him about the Triforce's location, given their age. It was also the first incarnation of the Mice's hatred to appear since the Mice's downfall, and desire to conquer the world, like his predecessor. It thus set out to Hyrule in an attempt to claim the Triforce, being aware of its location and the temples connected to the 7 sages. Kum and Kotake meanwhile started brainwashing several Gerudo at the Spirit Temple, turning them into Iron Knuckles. Nabuhu, the second in command of the Gerudo, suspected something was up, and so investigated the Spirit Temple on her own time. In Hyrule, Ganondorf visited the tribes who held the spiritual stones and cursed each of them when they refused to hand them over. The Great Deku Tree was cursed with a Goma infestation in his insides, which caused him to fall ill and grow close to death. The Gorons, who had displayed the Goron's ruby in the middle of their city, were cursed with starvation. Ganondorf namely used a large boulder to block off the entrance to Dodongo's cavern, cutting them off from their food supply. He also revived the Dodongos that had once lived in the cave, including the large King Dodongo. Dahunia took the Goron's ruby for himself to prevent the other Gorons from eating it. The Zora Sapphire meanwhile had been passed down the Zora royal family and had been given to Princess Ruto by her late mother for her to give to her future husband. While it was not handed over, Ganondorf made Lord Jabu Jabu ill via the parasite baronade in his insides, as well as the Baris and Biris related to it. Lastly, it also seems that Ganondorf cursed the Forest Temple at this time via the creation of Phantom Ganon. All of this caused the climate of evil to descend on the realm and demons to become more numerous in the region. For example, this evil revived the spirits of the priestess sisters in the Forest Temple, causing them to roam it as undead pose. In response to all of this, the Great Deku Tree summoned a fairy named Navi to get Link, the Hylian boy who had been left in his care about a decade earlier. Link was a bit of a pariah to the other Kokiri due to lacking a fairy. He was most notably bullied by Mido, their self-proclaimed leader. This was likely due to Mido's crush on Saria, who was the only Kokiri who considered Link a true friend. When Link was summoned, Mido did not let him through to the Great Deku Tree until he had found the Kokiri sword in the bowels of the forest, purchased the Deku shield from the Kokiri shop. Afterwards, the Deku Tree asked Link to break the curse placed on him, and he did so by killing the Goma that lurked deep under the tree. When he was done, the Deku Tree told Link about Ganondorf and to seek out Princess Zelda at Hyrule Castle. He also gave Link the Kokiri's emerald and died soon after, with Mido blaming this on Link. Link would leave the forest soon after with Navi at his side and was given the fairy Ocarina by Saria as he did so. Link then went on to Hyrule Castle Town in Hyrule Castle, where he met Malon, the daughter of ranch owner Talon. He had fallen asleep while delivering some milk to the castle, which Malon suspected. She thus gave Link an egg that eventually hatched into a cuckoo. Then snuck past the guards in the castle yard who had been stationed there because someone had tried breaking into the castle to see Princess Zelda. Link found Talon and used the cuckoo to wake him up and snuck past the guards in the inner courtyard, before meeting Zelda. She explained that she had been having prophetic dreams, something that both she and Link were prone to due to the climate of evil descending on the realm. The same had been true for the previous hero from the era of Skyloft. Zelda had also dreamed about Ganondorf, who had come to Hyrule Castle to swear fealty to the King of Hyrule, likely in a gambit to get close to the Ocarina of Time and the Song of Time. Zelda showed him to Link and told him about the Triforce's location, also formulating a plan. He would gather the keys to the Sacred Realm to get into it before Ganondorf could. To this end, Zelda wrote Link a letter to allow him passage onto Death Mountain, and Impa taught him Zelda's lullaby due to the mysterious powers it contained, per Zelda's dream. After this, Link started his quest in earnest. He was followed on it by a mysterious bird called Kepora Gebora, provided him with useful advice and was the reincarnation of a sage, possibly Gepora from the era of Skyloft. At this time, the Happy Mask shop also opened in Hyrule Castle Town. It was operated by a smiling mask salesman who would give masks to people for them to sell at a profit to others who wanted the masks. Link accepted this task and delivered various masks to people across Hyrule. When he was done, other masks became available for him to wear. He also went to London Ranch and met Malon there, befriending the horse Epona and learning the song that Malon's mother had made to tame her. Afterwards, Link made his way to Kakariko village where he learned the Sun Song after defeating the Poe forms of the Composer Brothers in battle. They mistook him for a minion of Ganondorf and so attacked. Link used Zelda's letter to open the way to Death Mountain and went to Goron City. There, he played Zelda's lullaby to open the door to Darunia's room. She was insulted that his sworn brother would only send a child in response to the crisis his people were facing. In response, Link returned to the forest and was taught Saria's song by Saria in front of the forest temple. This because it was said Darunia liked music from the forest, and when he played the song for Darunia, Goron boss burst out in dancing. Then offered Link the Goron's ruby if he could prove he was a man by defeating the monsters inside the Dongo's cavern. Link was given a Goron's bracelet so he could lift the bomb flowers growing on the mountain, with which he blew up the rock blocking the cave. Then went inside and defeated the Dodongos within, as well as King Dodongo. This earned him the respect of the Gorons, the status of Darunia's sworn brother, and the Goron Ruby. After this, Link headed to Zora's domain. He traveled along the shores of Zora's river and played the ocarina to some frogs there. At the end, he played Zelda's lullaby to make the sleepless waterfall part and enter the domain. There he obtained the silver scale from Zora after finishing a diving minigame, which allowed Link to dive deeper than normal. He then used this ability to go through the tunnel to Lake Hylia, where he found a bottled letter from Ruto, who had gone missing. It said she was inside Lord Jabu Jabu's belly and asked for help. This is something she had done since she was a child, but she had recently noticed the parasites in his body. Link showed this letter to the king, which allowed him passage to Zora's fountain. There he unloaded a fish from a bottle in front of Lord Jabu Jabu, causing him to be sucked in and swallowed. Once inside, Link found Ruto and worked with her to kill the parasites. They also found Ruto's lost Zora's sapphire. She was captured when they did, and Link had to fight a big Octo afterwards. Not long after, Link fought against Baronade and freed Ruto. She had become smitten with him due to his actions and so gave him the Zora Sapphire, the significance of which Link did not really understand. While that was happening, Ganondorf betrayed the royal family and attacked Hyrule Castle. Impa sensed danger and so fled with the princess, while a guard tried to stop Ganondorf. He sustained mortal wounds from this, and Link witnessed Impa and Zelda fleeing on horseback as he neared Hyrule Castle town. Zelda had secured the Ocarina of Time and threw it in the moat as they passed by. Ganondorf then appeared and struck down Link with his magic, before resuming his chase. Link came to and after claimed Ocarina of Time, at which point he received a telepathic message from Zelda in which she taught him the Song of Time. Trying to fulfill their plan, Link went into Hyrule Castle town and met the guard who died before his eyes. He then went to the Temple of Time and used all the keys he had gathered to open the Door of Time. Master Sword lay before him and he pulled it, but because he was too young to become the hero of time and fulfill his prophecy, his spirit was put to sleep in the Sacred Realm for 7 years. Ganondorf had also anticipated Link opening the Door of Time and used the opportunity to enter the Sacred Realm. Inside, he may have gotten rid of all sages except Rauru, and also touched the Triforce. However, his heart was unbalanced, and so he only received the Triforce of Power, the Triforce of Wisdom and Courage going to those newly chosen by the gods. This still allowed Ganondorf to become the Demon King, however, and true successor of Demise. That ends the era of political strife in the region and marks the return of conflict at which the Demon King is at the center. What happens in the intervening 7 years is something I have already covered previously, so give that a watch if you are interested. I also hope to see you next time, and goodbye.